Good afternoon. Good afternoon. I'm Bill Griswold, director of the Cleveland Museum of Art, and it is my privilege to welcome you to this year's 14th annual Dr. John and Helen Collis Lecture. Each year, the Collis Lecture brings to Cleveland an internationally recognized curator or academic in order that he or she may present new scholarship, discuss a major archaeological discovery, or, as this year, explore in depth the subject of an exhibition. Topics alternate between ancient Greek and, every other year, Byzantine art, and this year, as on previous occasions, I'm happy to report that the lecture has attracted nearly a full house. The Collis Lecture series is made possible through the Dr. John and Helen Collis Family Endowment. We are also grateful for the support of the Hellenic Preservation Society of Northeastern Ohio, which promotes Greek culture and of which the Collises were founding members. Today, above all, I would like to express my and our collective thanks to Helen and John Collis, and to recognize the Collis family. Their generosity has done much to further the museum's reputation for groundbreaking scholarship, and we are honored that this series and our Dr. John and Helen Collis Gallery of Greek Art memorialize and celebrate their munificent support. Thank you, Collis family. I'm now pleased to introduce our curator of Greek and Roman art, Michael Bennett. He will, in turn, introduce our speaker, another Michael Padgett. Dr. Bennett received his PhD from Harvard. He previously was curator of classical art at the museum in Tampa, and we are proud that he has been here with us in Cleveland since 1998. Thank you all for coming. Ladies and gentlemen, Michael Bennett.
Thank you, Bill. Hellenes and Philhellenes, welcome once again to this, the 14th Dr. John and Helen Collis Lecture. Many of you will know that the Collis Lecture was originally envisioned as a way to bring new scholarship and exhibitions in the related fields of ancient Greek and Byzantine art to the attention of Clevelanders. Dr. John and Helen Collis, my colleague Stephen Flegel, curator of medieval art, and I, had hoped those many years ago that the Collis Lecture would become a mainstay in the educational programming at the museum. And as seen by this nearly full auditorium, it has certainly met and even exceeded our highest aspirations. It also shows that the Hellenic tradition is still strongly resonates with contemporary audiences. It's my great pleasure and honor to introduce this year's Collis Lecturer, J. Michael Padgett. I've known Michael since graduate school. We were both in Harvard's doctoral program in the Department of Fine Arts. Michael always impressed me as someone with a clear vision of what he wanted to do. He came to Harvard with an MA in museology from the University of Minnesota. And before that, he received a BA in classical civilization from the University of Kentucky, magna cum laude. During his last 2 years at Harvard, Michael was also a curatorial assistant in the Department of Classical Art, Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, under the supervision of Cornelius for mule. For his dissertation, completed in 1990, the Geros painter, an Athenian eccentric, Michael worked closely with Dietrich von Bothmer, then curator in charge in the Department of Greek and Roman Art at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, who, in turn, had been a student of the famous Oxford scholar Sir John Beazley, who originated the method of attributing the painted decorations of Athenian vases to the hands of specific painters based on his meticulous and painstaking connoisseurship. Michael's first job out of graduate school was as curator of classical art at the Tampa Museum of Art from 1990 to 1992. And he has been curator of ancient art at the Princeton University Art Museum since then. While at Princeton, Michael has curated a number of major exhibitions and edited and contributed to their associated catalogs. Empire of Stone, Roman sculpture from the Art Museum, Princeton University, 2001. The Centaur's Smile, the Human Animal in Early Greek Art, 2003, and City of Gold, Tomb and Temple in Ancient Cyprus, 2012. But this afternoon, Michael will be speaking about his most recent exhibition, The Berlin Painter and His World, Athenian Vase-Painting in the early 5th century BC, which, incidentally, is currently on view at the Toledo Museum of Art until October 1st. The Berlin Painter and His World is the first, and doubtless the last, authoritative overview of this master of the Athenian red figure technique. And as an aside, and for those curators in the audience, this should be very impressive. He was never denied a single loan. Now that tells you about his stature in the field. Amazing. The exhibition is gorgeous, insightful, and instructive, and the catalog, signed copies of which may be purchased following the lecture, is a monument of scholarship, all 430 pages of it. Please join me in welcoming J. Michael Padgett.
Thank you, Mike. The secret is not to ask for any loans that you think you might get turned down for. I first want to say that how pleased I am to be here and how much fun I'm having being in Cleveland and spending lots of time in the galleries of the Cleveland Museum of Art, which is full of stupefyingly fabulous works of art. I've been in the medieval galleries and the Asian galleries and the contemporary galleries and, of course, the Greek and Roman galleries. And this museum is unbelievable. The depth and the quality of your holdings here. I mean, so many people in New York, which is a very provincial place, don't realize what they're missing by not making a beeline to this museum. But I'm going to be beating the drum loudly when I get back. I want to thank Bill Griswold and Mike Bennett for inviting me, and especially Dr. John and Helen Collis for inviting me. I'm very honored to be a Collis Lecturer, which is renowned now throughout the world of ancient art and Byzantine art, and is known to all people who love Greece, and the people of Greece and the art of Greece, my favorite country after this one. Now I'm going to Italy in 2 weeks. So I've been asked to speak to you today about an ancient Greek artist whose work is the focus of an exhibition that was recently at the Princeton University Art Museum and that, as Mike said, is currently on view at the Toledo Museum of Art, where it closes on the 1st of October. The name of the exhibition, of which I'm the curator, is The Berlin Painter and His World, Athenian Vase-Painting in the early 5th century BC. And if you're interested in seeing it, it's up for another week. You have to go to Toledo, but you must master your inhibitions in that regard and go anyway. It's a lovely place, and I'm very grateful to the wonderful museum. I'm grateful to them for taking the exhibition. The works of art in this exhibition were created in the world's first democracy, in which citizens chose their laws and their leaders by common assent. It was a time of new hopes, but also of great troubles. In 490 BC, Athens was violently attacked by the powerful Persian Empire, which was based in Iran, but there's a Greek and a Persian. Based in Iran, the Persian Empire was, but extended from Egypt to India. Repulsed at the Battle of Marathon, the Persians returned 10 years later to mount a massive invasion of all of Greece. And against heavy odds, the Greeks prevailed, defeating the Persians at Salamis and Plataea, and in subsequent years driving them back into Asia. The leading role played by Athens in this victory imbued the city with new wealth, confidence, and prestige, at times reflected in Athenian, or as we say, Attic vase painting. Perhaps the largest body of pictorial imagery to have survived from antiquity. Depictions of myth, cult, and daily life on red figure vases provide important insights into Greek culture in this period. But their selective and often ambiguous character leave many questions unanswered. One of the principal means by which scholars have studied Attic vases has been through close analysis of their style, allowing for the attribution of individual works to the hands of specific, usually anonymous painters. This exhibition uses the work of one such artist, the Berlin painter, as a springboard for a larger discussion of the role of stylistic analysis in art historical research. But who is he? Who is the Berlin painter? He is, or he was, an anonymous Athenian vase painter active in the early years of the early 5th century BC, from about 505 to 465 BC. He's an artist well known to students, many students of Greek art, but we don't really know his name. This is not unusual. Most Athenian vase painters did not sign their work and are known only by the names that scholars have assigned to them. Some vase painters occasionally did sign, like Zeus, Euphronius, but most seem never to have done so. Was the Berlin painter an Athenian citizen entitled to all the social and political rights of the new democracy? Or was he a metic, a resident alien, or even a slave? I say he only because although some vase painters may have been female, all the names that are known to us are male. Except from what we can extract from his art, we know nothing at all about the Berlin painter, and yet in ways we shall discuss, we feel that we know him well. As one scholar put it, fortunately, anonymity is limited to his name. But first, it's necessary to say a little something about what a vase painter does and how he does it. These are two details of the same vase in Boston, with the head of Heracles holding his club. On the left, on one side of the vase, he's executed in black figure, and on the right side, he's in red figure. In black figure, the figures are painted in black silhouette on the orange-red clay ground of the vessel, and the details, internal details, are incised with a needle. And additional details of white and purple red are added with clay slip. The black, the purple, the white, it's all purified clay that is used like paint that fires these colors within the kiln. I can't go into the technical details now, but there's no pigment involved. It's clay, which is why it's so durably bonded to the surface of the vessel. Around 525 BC, someone said, maybe the painter of this vase said, I'm tired of doing it that way. I'm going to outline the figures and blacken the background with the slip and leave the figures in the reserved in the red clay of the vessel's body. Now there's no clay to incise with the needle, so you have to paint in all those little details with a very fine brush. And many of the blacker lines are in relief lines that stand up, you can feel them with your fingertip. There's a faker in Italy that uses the whiskers of rodents, rats and mice, to have just the right springiness and thinness. He introduced me to this one time when I visited his farm. I had this vision of all these tweezed rodents running around with their whiskers taken away. This piece in the exhibition we added in order to demonstrate to visitors more about this technique. You can see on the left a mounted Amazon that's riding on a horse. It's been outlined with relief lines. So it's been laid down and raised up. You can't drag the brush, it flattens it. You have to lay them down and raise them up. And then over sketch, first though, a preliminary sketch, if you see the forelegs of the horse just visible there, they scratched it with some charcoal to guide the drawing when they began using the black slip. Those are usually covered up and invisible in the final design. And only the head, the upper right of the Amazon, was finished in the red figure technique with an 1/8" band using a wider brush that gives you a zone to cover up any errors when you're blacking in the background so you don't impinge on the figure. And then there are additional types of glazes that can be used. This detail on the lower right, you see the chest of the woman has been done with diluted glaze that fire a golden reddish color, lighter than the black, for her breast and profile and the lines of her garment, and the necklace, and the scrumbled diluted glaze for the hair coming out of her snood. We put this in the exhibition and hope that people will look at it at the front, and then they go through the exhibition and see the vases, and they recognize these techniques when they're looking closely at the vase. The Berlin painter was given to him over a century ago by the great Oxford scholar Sir John Beazley after this splendid amphora in the Antikensammlung in Berlin. Beazley recognized the same artist's hand on a number of vases in different public and private collections, and in a seminal article in 1911, he made an argument for attributing them all to the same individual. With precision, he defined the particular system of renderings that defined the artist's style, from the shapes of his pots and the varied pattern work of their subsidiary ornament to the drawing of ankles and collarbones and drapery. He was explicit in declaring that a system so definite, coherent, distinctive, and in some respects so willful is most easily intelligible as a personal system, the child of one man's brain and will. This method of identifying different anonymous artists with subtly different and tellingly distinctive pictorial systems underlies Beazley's subsequent lifelong approach to the study of Attic vase painting, and was accepted and adopted by scholars around the world as the means to bring order and clarity to what before had been a bewildering mass of largely unsorted painted Greek ceramics. Certainty is impossible, and disagreements over attributions are common, but this methodology, call it connoisseurship, when applied rigorously and combined with knowledge and experience, makes it possible to identify with some confidence works by individual vase painters, and given sufficient evidence not only to define the course of their careers, but also to date their creations more closely than is possible through purely archaeological means. Here we have a satyr and the god Hermes. From the beginning, I can say that one of the things distinctive about the Berlin painter's style is that his vases tend to be mostly black, with often single figure on either side, jumping out at you from the black background. In this case, he's conflated three figures, the satyr, the faun, and Hermes, by having them share the same contour. It's very much involved with the contours of the figures. You see the fan of the hands coming out, holding the pick of the lyre, the jug, the wine jug, a series of perpendiculars and parallel lines that define the contour. This black deadening space, there's no way to represent illusionistically the recession in space. So we must intuit that the satyr's in the foreground, and behind him in space is the faun, and behind him is Hermes. It's not easy to pictorially do it. This is something that Attic vase painting is limited in, and doesn't have shading, doesn't have chiaroscuro, aerial perspective. The background is obliterated in many cases. But it adds to the decorative effect of the vase. In this case, an amphora with handles decorated with ivy vines, retains its lid. This is a big vase. It would hold gallons and gallons of wine, and was found in a tomb, an Etruscan tomb in Italy. A lot of the vases we'll be seeing were found in Italy and elsewhere. The Etruscans loved them, and so did the Greeks who settled in southern Italy. And so much so that when they were found in the 19th century, they were assumed to be, in the 18th century, late 18th, soon to be Etruscan, because they were found in Etruscan tombs. But then they began looking more closely at them and realized they were inscribed in Greek, and not when they were inscribed, and not in Etruscan. And when they started digging in Greece and found the same vases, they realized that they were seeing evidence of a large export market. These were one of the most popular export products of ancient Athens, and they were exported in their thousands. He had a long career. We think we can trace his early works and his later works and his middle works. And we can define them in more or less broad 5 and 10 year periods. This vase here in the exhibition, whoops, go back here, you rascal, is a pelliky on the right, a squat bag-shaped vase. And you notice it doesn't have a single figure isolated. The figures are set within a panel of decorative subsidiary ornament. This was a traditional way of representing works on black figure and in early red figure vases. The Berlin painter soon cast it off, but this is when he's still maybe a teenager in the so-called pioneer workshop, of which one painter was Phintius, who painted this Sictor, a wine cooler from Boston that's in the exhibition. And there are elements in the early Berlin painter's style that suggest that he received his training at the side of Phintius. This big mythological scene is a rarity. It's the first depiction in vase painting we have of the death of Aegisthus. This is the lover of Orestes' mother, Queen Clytemnestra, the wife of Agamemnon, whom they murdered Agamemnon when he came back from the Trojan War, and Aegisthus became the king of Mycenae. And when Orestes grew up, he took his vengeance on Aegisthus, and here he is pulling him off the throne and killing him. And he looks with his mouth open in this direction because coming to kill him with an axe is his mother on the other side. But she's being restrained by the old herald Talthybius. Another early work is this fragmentary Calyx crater. That's a complete Calyx crater in the upper right by Euphronius, who was another influence on the Berlin painter. And we're talking about the years 505, 500 in this period. This fragmentary work with formerly in the Getty Museum, shows the warrior Ajax carrying the enormous body of the dead Achilles, whose head and arms drag on the ground. And if we compare it with the Euphronius crater formerly in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, where the body of Sarpedon, his name written here, is being taken away by death, Thanatos, you see the discrete drawing of the hair, locks of the hair, and the very careful drawing of the hair now drawn up in a bun in the Achilles by the Berlin painter. His eyes closed in death and his fingers dragging on the ground, even showing the wrinkles in the knuckles and the drawing of the fingernails. You can see the relief lines standing up that contour the figure. So this shows influence of another great master. In the first quarter of the 5th century, the Berlin painter is the principal painter of pots, along with a contemporary named the Cleophrades painter, who painted all of these vases that you see on the screen. Pot painters as opposed to cup painters. If you painted cups, the wide, shallow wine cups, the Calyx, you tended to specialize in those, whereas the painters of vases, hydrii, amphorae, craters, larger vessels, also specialized in these. So some did both, and the Cleophrades painter did some very fine cups. But his style is distinctive. Notice the outlined lips and the drawing of the nostrils and the hair, somewhat distinctive from that of the Berlin painter. This vase from the Getty with a group of boys and their dogs is in the exhibition, as is this vase on the right from Boston with a young man who's a victor. He's been tied with fillets, red fillets, to show that he's the winner in a contest. And some admirer, an older man, has given him a hare as a love gift. And we can tell he's a live hare because his legs are still flexed. He can keep it as a pet, or he can take it home to his mother and put it in the pot. So we had a few vases by the Cleophrades painter in the exhibition as well to help flesh out the picture of vase painting in this period. There are 84 works in the exhibition, and of which over 50 are by the Berlin painter himself. There are also small statuettes in bronze, which we'll see a few examples of. This is by the Berlin painter, another early work, and in the same shape as the name vase in Berlin, but this is in Basel. But now he has eschewed the ornament of the vine above, and the figures are just jumping out against the black void, defined by the shape of the potting itself. That's the only frame that they have. They still stand on an ornamental band, and he is a master of ornament. He's not sloppy at all with his palmettes and lotuses and ivy vines. On one side, Athena, facing left, holding out a jug, this wonderful shield with a whirl of heads of lions and winged griffins and winged horses. Here's a detail of her head. You see the very carefully drawn, never overlapping, never smearing relief lines of the locks of her hair. And Heracles' hair actually rendered in texture with little pellets of clay that are embedded into the soft clay when it's still yielding. Wearing his lion skin neatly tucked up with the tail, belted with the tail tucked up behind. And they're facing each other. And this is another aspect of the Berlin painter's style, is that these individual figures isolated on black backgrounds face each other on opposite sides of the vase. So they're separated physically, but they conceptually share the same space and are interacting and are to be thought of together. I'm going to do this more or less by shape. There are many ways to approach this chronologically, by subject. We'll go through some of his principal shapes. Another amphora shape is that on the left, which is a Panathenaic shape, because its narrow, constricted neck and lower body resemble those of Panathenaic Prize amphorae, which are black figure vessels full of olive oil that are awarded as prizes to victorious athletes at the Panathenaic Games every 4 years in Athens. Always with Athena on one side and with the athletic event for which they are awarded on the other. This, in fact, is by the Berlin painter, who continues, like all painters, to work in a black figure style only when painting these particular prize amphorae, which are commissioned by the state to contain oil and to be awarded to the victors. But he's obviously taken that shape and using it, adapted it for his normal red figure style with this discus thrower. And now even the ground line is gone. The figure defines space. He brings space into existence by being there. Again, defined only by the elegant potting, the contours of the vessel itself. There's a detail of him. And you can see that he uses diluted glaze for the minor muscles of the abdomen and the rib cage and the arms and the relief lines to define the clavicles and the pectorals. He seems to almost be parting the black void to crawl into existence. A discus with a little owl on it, which is a symbol of Athens and of Athena. It might have been an official designation to show that the weight of the discus had been measured and was a standard shape. We have the little statuette on the right from Boston that was also a man who was holding a discus, an athlete. Who, of course, they're shown in the nude because that's how they competed, which distinguished them from all the other peoples of the ancient world. And we put a few statuettes in the exhibition to inform the iconography of the vases and to sort of relieve the tedium of all these pots. Here's another vase of Panathenaic shape, again with no ground line, no frame, no subsidiary ornament. On one side, the hero Perseus chasing the Gorgon, or being chased by the Gorgon's sister. He's cut the head off of her sister Medusa and put it into his sack, which he carries with him. Here's the sickle he used to cut it off with, and her sister is chasing him. This is a traditional subject that goes back 200 years in Attic vase painting, and this is practically the last depiction of it. It's certainly the last great depiction of it. Some of his subject matter, therefore, is old-fashioned and traditional, and other times it's innovative, like that depiction of Orestes killing Aegisthus. Another shape of amphora, a type C so-called, with a distinctive torus-shaped rim. Again, no ornament at all. This is one of the masterpieces of the Metropolitan Museum with another one of his favorite subjects. The Berlin painter apparently was a music lover because he paints musicians of all kinds, particularly lyre players and particularly kitharodes. A kitharode is a singer who accompanies himself on the kithara, a big wooden concert lyre. And in this case, again, the figure on the other side relates to that on the reverse and the obverse. This is a judge in the contest of a formal musical contest who holds a forked wand, which is an emblem of his authority. And he has one finger out as though he's counting the measure, counting the time of the song. I have a detail, I think. That's him on the left, a young kitharode with his head back and his mouth open in song. And on the right, on another vessel by the Berlin painter in the Louvre with a bearded contestant. These are probably a contest for you boys and for men. In ancient Athens, you grew a beard as soon as you were old enough to do so. So if you don't have one, you're a teenager and still working on it. This is the cloth that covers the vessel, the kithera, when it's not in use. Another shape of amphora is a neck amphora, because the neck is offset and has a fillet defining the juncture of neck and body. In this case, with a twisted handle, which is a shape that he particularly liked, and a molded rim. The god Dionysus on one side, with a little lion clawing up his arm, holding a thyrsus and the cantharus wine jug, which was particular to him. On the other side, a satyr running up with a wineskin to fill the god's cup. The satyr is shown ithyphallic in this case, which is not usual for the Berlin painter. He's rather a prim painter. He never shows a nude woman at all in his work, not even a nude female breast. And nor are there any raucous scenes of symposium and comasts misbehaving like you'd get on contemporary cups of the period, which can get quite lively indeed. More twisted handle neck amphora, and these are big, handsome vases. These are both in Boston, again with but now with comasts. Comasts are symposiists, banqueters who have drunk so much that they've got up and it's gone on the prod, and they walk around holding wine cups and dancing and swinging wineskins over their head and chasing flute girls. And in this case, older bearded man being accompanied by a strapping young man on the left who's bringing an apparently empty wine jug. And this chap has his dog with him. He's often been called Anacreon because the poet Anacreon was said to go everywhere with his little dog. This is sort of Jack Russell of antiquity. We'll see him again later. Actually, the Berlin painter is quite fond of animals, and they turn up in a lot of his vessels. There's a hare on the upper left, a lion in the lower left, and his lions are quite distinctive. This is another one on the right, a lioness with roaring mouths and teeth. There's the fawn in the middle from the name vase, and then this head of a ram on a vessel that's in the Louvre, which is one of my favorite animals by him. He's most known for this kind of amphora, which is a smaller amphora, a neck amphora, called a Nolan amphora, after the site of Nola in southern Italy, near Naples. They have a tall neck and a canis mouth. This is the Nolan on the left. The one on the right is a slight variant of it called a Dublin. The one on the left has triple reeded handles. This has double, but they're basically the same shape, always with one figure on either side, and they're related to one another in every case. This pattern work of his is very distinctive to him. It's not important in itself, it's simply that it's one of the things that he's the only one who does it, except his students. A cross square coming up from the bottom, a meander going left. A cross square pendant from the top, a meander going right. Upper, lower, facing alternately. Ulfa, we call it. And it's one of the characteristics of his style. But he does other things like these ivy leaves beneath this comast, who's dancing while balancing a wine cup on one hand. Here's another Nolan with Zeus on the left. He's very fond of Zeus, actually, and represents him often in the statuette, and the lower image from the Metropolitan may represent Zeus. In this case, on the left, he's attacking a giant who appears on the right. And giants are usually shown dressed like Greek warriors, carrying a shield and wearing a helmet and holding a spear. But that's not going to do him any good, because that's the thunderbolt of Zeus with which he used to defeat the giants. On other vases, he's chasing a nymph instead of a giant. No woman was safe around Zeus. He had lots of progeny. Here, but the Berlin painter doesn't content himself with that. He's known for having a single figure on either side, but in this case, he said, I'm tired of doing that. I'll throw a band of ornament all the way around the vase, and I'll put two figures on one side, and I'll keep them full size, but I'll make them lie down so that they'll fit. And this is the god Dionysus leaning on a cushion, and a satyr playing the flutes, the double flutes in front of him, who's actually leaning against him so that the god seems to be smacking him to telling him to get off. And on the other side, a satyr dipping a jug into a bell crater, a mixing bowl, a punch bowl for mixing wine and water. The Greeks mix their syrupy fresh wine with water to cut it, and if the symposium was getting out of control, they put more water in it, and if conversation was lagging, they'd put less water in it. And they might drink 6 or 7 of these in an evening. Remember the shape of that vessel there, how it comes down without a foot. It just comes and has lug handles on the side. We'll see that again in a second. There's a variety of amphorae he does. This is not truly a Nolan, but it's one similar to it. This is in the Getty Museum. Again, no ornament at all, but now with the side of the foot reserved, which gives it a different look. On one side, a Greek warrior with a shield with a leather apron to catch plunging blows and arrows, chasing a barbarian. And this reminds us again that this is the time of the Persian Wars, when the Greeks are defeating the Persians. The Persians took Athens in 480 BC and burned it to the ground and knocked down all the temples on the Acropolis. So we may say something is circa 480, but even the Berlin painter had to stop and flee for his life from the invading Persians and had to go back and find a place to lay his head like every other Athenian. The Persian we recognize by his trousers and his sleeve tunic and the nature of his felt or leather cap and his big bow case. That's not just a quiver, that's for the whole bow. He painted other so-called barbarians. To a Greek, a barbarian was anybody who wasn't Greek. The king of Persia, a very sophisticated gentleman, was a barbarian as far as the Greeks were concerned. This is an African warrior in a scene on a fragment found in Athens. For they're not only found in Italy, they are indeed found in Greece, and as far away as the Crimea and the Black Sea. This wonderful neck amphora in Basel shows a completely different approach. In his middle period, say from after around 480 or so, he experiments with more multi-figure compositions and more floral ornament, so that he lets himself go with gorgeous big palmettes above and below, and then runs the figures in a continuous frieze all the way around the vessel. On one side, Heracles and his friend are fighting Amazons, because one of his labors was to take the girdle, the belt from Queen Hippolyta of the Amazons, and she lies at his feet. On the other side, Amazons rush up to the reinforcements, some dressed like Greek warriors, some dressed in barbarian garb with sleeves and the Persian cap and carrying an Amazon war hatchet. Here's one that's both got a Persian cap and a Greek cuirass on. Wonderful big decorative vase that goes back to a composition by one of his former masters, Euphronius. You might have seen the sketch of it in the workshop. Another shape is the hydria, which he paints from the early days, a water jar, hydria as in hydraulic, with two horizontal handles and one handle for carrying, because they're heavy when you fill them with water, and then one in the back for pouring, and a round mouth normally. Well, the traditional way of doing this, and this is by his teacher Phintius, is to put a single scene on the front, surrounded by ornament, and then a separate scene on the shoulder, also with ornamental frames. He abandons that. He uses his new technique of approach of isolating a few figures against the black background with a minimum of ornament, just confined to the ground line. No more, the shoulder is completely black. It gives a completely different decorative effect to it. And it was wildly popular. The Etruscans couldn't get enough of them, nor could they make them fast enough to get them there. Actually, I should mention the subject there. That's Heracles chasing the sea god Nereus. How do we know it's Nereus? Because he's waving a fish around in the air. I'm a sea god. The gods have their attributes to help us identify who they are. We rely on the attributes or the context, or in the case of Heracles, his lion skin, to tell us who's who. This hydria in the Vatican, which I was so happy that they lent to us, is one of his masterpieces, and in which he experiments again with another format for decorating the same shape we just saw. Now, instead of the entire front being given to the figure, the entire body is given to the winged bronze tripod, a big basin on bronze legs with wings that's flying over the sea. These are an octopus and fish and leaping dolphins. This is the god Apollo flying from his birthplace on Delos to establish his oracle at Delphi, when the oracle there was symbolized by the tripod where the goddess sat. And when you got to the artist got to the corner where this flat shoulder begins, he falls, Apollo, back on it, playing the lyre, because he's the god of music, and carrying in with his bow, with which he will kill the serpent at Delphi and take over the shrine. When it's photographed at the right angle, you can't even tell that it's on a vase, let alone that it's perpendicular from the body to the figure. It's a masterpiece of melding of imagery and shape. The other kind of hydria is not like the one we were just looking at, but has a continuous, unbroken profile from rim to foot. and is a tubbier in profile. There are different ways to approach this. One is to put a band of ornament between the handles and confine the figures to the shoulder. Another is to fill up the body with the ground line lower below. This is a group of gods making a sacrifice at an altar with Nike, the winged goddess of victory, Apollo, and the goddesses Leto and Artemis. This is Achilles killing the Amazon Penthesilea. The Amazons are getting it in the neck on these pots. Here's a detail of that, a very early work by the Achilles painter. The Penthesilea had come to the aid of the Trojans, who were also Easterners, and are often and sometimes shown in Eastern garments. She wears a Scythian cap to show that she's an Easterner. And Achilles dispatches her on the day that she comes to help the Trojans. Supposedly, according to one poet, they fell in love when they looked in each other's eyes, but it was too late then, because already he speared her in the chest. And here's a detail of Leto and Artemis from that other vase in Boston. Here's his name, Leto. He's perfectly literate, the Berlin painter, and many of his figures are identified by inscription, which is normally written in this purple red, but not particularly loquacious. One of his favorite habits is this little cruciform pendant on necklaces. And the big, heavy, round chin done with a single relief line that's laid down and raised up. The mother and daughter look very similar. She's smelling a flower. This is the quiver and bow of Artemis. But they look severe, remote. In fact, to me, they look dangerous. The Persians were unwise to insult such gods as Titius and Niobe could have told them. This is another shape, a wine jar called a stamnos, which has a wide mouth and a collar neck. And often these will have more than one figure on them because the space allows it. Again, gods sacrificing. Now that's curious because it raises a question. Pouring a libation of wine is an offering to the gods. Well, why do the gods pour libations? They're the recipients of libation. On the other side of that vase in the upper left, there is a similar scene of libation, but it's mortal Athenians making the offering. So it may be that these images of gods libating are a guide to pious action. This is what you should be doing and how you should be doing it. On the lower right, a mythological scene, somewhat damaged vase, but I wanted to get some mythology into this exhibition, with the hero Peleus bringing his young son Achilles. So we've seen Achilles before, but now he's just a boy with red hair, done with diluted glaze, and he's being given over to the centaur Chiron to be educated. Chiron was the teacher of young heroes, and centaurs carry he carries a big branch that he uses to hang his game from. One of the things he'll teach Achilles is how to hunt. And he's reaching out a hand to greet him. Being a civilized centaur, unlike his wild cousins, he's usually shown with a fully human front end, and then the horse part hitched on the back like a trailer. There's another fragmentary stamnos in Oxford with a really wild scene of maenads. Minos means crazy, and a maenad is a crazy woman. In the following of Dionysus, they're crazed with wine. And the first maenads, as we learned from the Bacchae of Euripides, were the sisters and mother and aunts of the king of Thebes, who doubted the divinity of the god Dionysus. So he drove his women folk wild, and when they saw the king, they tore him to pieces, mistaking him for a wild animal. And here's his head, and here's one of his legs, and over the handle, one handle is a big mass of painted purple of his guts, and the lion is down here going, yeah, get him. And these are the wildest maenads you'll see in this period, and this is indeed one of the earliest depictions of this. Now, we know this story from Euripides' Bacchae, but that's produced in 405 BC. This is painted in 490 BC. So the story is around long before the theatrical portrayal on the stage. Who knows what song the Berlin painter was listening to, what version of the story he was hearing. But obviously it had the same outcome with King Pentheus being torn to pieces. These are stamnoi as well, but of a very unusual shape. We don't know, because the Berlin painter not only never signed his name as painter, he also never signed his name as potter, and we get both kinds of signatures. Ezekias Apoiason means Ezekias potted it. Ezekias Egrafson means Ezekias drew it. And we have some vases that say Ezekias Apoiason ke Egrafson, he made it and he painted it. But most of the time, we don't have anything. But by close analysis of the profile drawings of shapes, we can attribute works to particular potters. These are usually anonymous. So we don't know if the Berlin painter did any of his own potting. He may have potted everything he did. He may have potted none of them. But some of his shapes are so distinctive and nobody else does them that it makes you very much wonder if he isn't responsible for them. So this tall, attenuated type of stamnos with the figures going around the shoulder are particular to him, and he may be the author of them. We have two different subjects here. This is Pelus, the father of Achilles, wrestling the nymph Thetis, the outcome of which will be their wedding and the birth of Achilles. And then the earliest depiction in Greek art of Heracles in the cradle, strangling the snakes that had been sent to kill him by the jealous queen of the gods, Hera, because she didn't like Zeus going around creating heroes on mortal women. And this is his parents looking on in alarm, and in fact, he's using one of the snakes to torture his half-brother Iphicles because he doesn't have the strength of Heracles. On the other side of the other vase, with Pelus and Thetis, we have her sisters, Thetis' sisters, the Nereids, the sea nymphs, running off to tell their father Nereus. We saw him earlier in human form waving a fish. Now his identity is revealed by having a fish-like lower body that ends in a sort of dolphin tail. The old man of the sea, Nereus. Here's that vase I pointed out and said, remember, we'll see it again later. It's that crater with that has no foot. It just falls down flat and has these lug handles. He is the earliest one to depict a bell crater like this, and therefore he may have invented this shape and may have been the potter. These wonderful vase in the Louvre, Heracles is reclining on a couch on one side. He's become a god, plucked from his funeral pyre to join the immortal gods on Olympus. He's hung up his lion skin and his quiver and bow and is having a glass of wine being served by a satyr on the other side who offers a jug and a lyre. And again, we have these embedded pellets to give the texture of his beard. There's another of this shape in the Louvre. That's one of his finest works, with Zeus on one side approaching the boy Ganymede, a prince of Troy with whom Zeus was smitten, and who seized him and carried him up to Olympus to be his cupbearer. So it wasn't just girls that had to watch out for Zeus. If you were a good-looking boy, you had to keep looking over your shoulder as well. They've already met because the cock that he holds is a tradition, like the hair we saw earlier, is a traditional love gift from an older man to a younger man, boy, in Greek society, in Athenian society. The hoop that he rows is a boyish pursuit, and it's an indicator, a signifier of his tender age. And diluted glaze has been used to show him as a blonde. This big volute crater, another vessel for mixing wine and water, is called a volute crater because the volute handles resemble those on Ionian capitals. Now, in traditional and black figure vessels of this shape, to leave the body black, and that's what the Berlin painter has done in this case, and just to confine the figures to the neck on either side, below a beautiful and carefully drawn palmette and lotus chain. On one side, the other side that I don't show is Heracles is killing the hero Memnon at Troy. Not Heracles, Achilles is killing Memnon he's always killing somebody, Achilles is. And on this side, he kills Hector. And their names are given. And so we know exactly what's going on. And it's watched by, on one side, Athena, who's the patroness and protector of Achilles. Her name is spelled out. And on the other side, Apollo. Apollo has turned its back on Hector and is walking away from him, resigning him to his fate. But he holds out the arrow that reminds us that before the day is over, Paris will shoot that arrow through the vulnerable heel of Achilles, and that he too is destined to die on the plains of Troy. That shape of volute crater had the black body. Here's a fragment of one in the Louvre that clearly the entire body was devoted to a big charging warrior on either side. On this case, we don't know if he's a giant facing Zeus or if he's Achilles. There's no inscription. But what interests us most is the scene on the neck, which is not drawn from the heroic from Homer or the battle at Troy, but is a school scene. These boys are standing in front of their seated teachers and reciting their lessons. And oil bottles and sponges and strigils that talk about this, recall the athletic field that's associated with the school are hanging in the background. And this teacher is leaning casually with one arm over the other, and he's looking at his laptop. This is a folding wooden diptych, hinged, covered with wax inside, and you, with the stylus, you write in the wax. And when you want to erase it, you flip it around and use the flat end to erase it, and you can write again on it. So everybody's always looking at their laptop. This is yet another type of punch bowl, but not a crater. It's a big round-bodied vessel that has a round bottom. It would have had a conical stand that's missing. And again, from this middle period where he experiments with multi-figure compositions and more floral ornament, there's beautiful lotus and palmette on top of the rim that you can't see. The chariot of Zeus, Zeus and his thunderbolt getting on the chariot, and with Nike holding an incense burner and Athena holding her helmet, and then a row of gods goes out in either side, in either direction. Before the Berlin painter, in the first decade of the 5th century, 30 years after the invention of red figure, most small vessels, oil bottles, wine jugs, were still made in black figure. They continue to be made in black figure, and often in very poor quality. There are thousands of them. But there were red figure examples, but not many. But the new red figure technique is lavished on cups and on big craters, but not on small vessels like this. But the Berlin painter pays them just as much attention. He starts decorating them in great numbers in red figure. And pretty soon, everybody's doing it, and they're doing it like him, with his signature style of a mostly black vase and little ornament. So that we have on the left an oinachoe, a wine jug, with Nike flying in to crown a young man. He's a victor either in an athletic contest or a musical contest. Nike is very popular in these, and she turns up in a lot of his vases. This is the time of the victory over the Persians. And so Nike, the goddess of victory, gets her own temple on the Acropolis, and her cult achieves new popularity. Another type of jug in the middle that doesn't have the high handle of the one on the left and no separate foot, a young man pouring a libation, in this case with an inscription praising two different youths as Colossus. Colossus is fair, so Menesicles, Menesicles is fair. He's a handsome young man of aristocratic lineage. He's a celebrity. He's the from your celebrity pages, you see it instead his name praised on the pots in the stalls in the agora where they're selling the pottery. There's that distinctive ulfa again. You see it. And then this type of wine jug, a chus, which is a plump, round-bodied vessel with a young man playing the barbiton lyre, and a boy who's younger than him holding his staff for him, and now he's got his hunting dog with him. That's not a lap dog, that's a hunting dog. Another type of small vessel he popularizes red figure on is the likathos, the oil bottle, and these contain olive oil, and they're common offerings in tombs. He has a variety of approaches to decorating them, usually with a all-black shoulder, just a band of ornament below, and a single figure. And this, the wine god Dionysus, Nike lighting in front of an altar and pouring wine on the red flames. But in this case, he left the body all black and put a single lion on the shoulder. So he doesn't like to do the same thing the same way all the time. The fragment on the left is Princeton's only significant piece by the Berlin painter. It's a fragment of a likathos with a tall lady. Look at the proportions of her head to the height. She's fashion model, tall and slim, and with the diluted glaze for the chiton underneath, and then the woolen himation done. Notice how the catenary lines, they approach the contour, but they stop short. These little things add liveliness, springiness, piquancy to the drawing. They bring the figures alive. They give them bounce and zip, and they're simple drawings, but they're sophisticated drawings. This fragment on the right, we learn a lot from fragments sometimes. That's the feet of a Nike flying off through the air on the right. And there's enough there, the way the feet are drawn, the ankles, the toes, the kick of the chiton, the double scallop line of the hem. There's no question it's by the Berlin painter. That's enough diagnostic elements there for us to attribute it with confidence to him. And even more interesting, this is from a big crater. Off to the left it says, Hector. Well, why is Nike flying away from Hector? Well, there was only one day that she abandoned him, and that was the day that Hector was killed by Achilles. So we can imagine the dying Hector down here and the victorious Achilles over here, about to receive a wreath from the goddess of victory. We learned during the course of doing this exhibition and the research for the catalog, we made joins, we made new attributions. The fragment here was in a collection in Switzerland, and my friend Robert Guy recognized that a vase in the Louvre that had a hole in it, that it dropped right in there, and now it's there. As you see, it's the same fragment. We got the collector to give it to the Louvre, and the Louvre promptly dropped it in place. So back they come. I was looking at this piece that someone had said was in the manner of the Berlin painter, and I could tell it was from a little lion that's biting a giant, where the lion helps the god Dionysus when he's fighting a giant. So I looked up my vases by the Berlin painter that had Dionysus fighting a giant, and I said, hey, wait a minute, it actually drops right in there. So now we'll have to convince him to give that to the museum in Vibo Valentia in Italy, but that may be a harder thing to do. There's these Panathenaic Prize amphorae I mentioned before. We have two of them by the Berlin painter in the exhibition and another in his manor. Magnificent big vases commissioned by the state as prizes, always with the inscription Tonathenathan Athlon, from the games at Athens, always with Athena on one side. The Berlin painter always puts the head of the Gorgon Medusa on his shield. In this case, the event was a long-distance race. When they're sprinting, their arms are out like this. When they're long distance, they're dropped down like they're doing the marathon. And the owner of this vase, Mr. Kalamanopoulos, who's a Greek ship owner, bought it because he thought that this runner here, balding chap at the back, looked like him, and in fact it does. We also made a list, we made a revised catalog raisonné of attributions to the Berlin painter. That's just a moment in time. It's my and Robert Guy's take on what new vessels attributed to the Berlin painter really are by him, what are in his manner, and we identified 70 pieces since Beasley's last list in the early 70s that we believe are new works by the Berlin painter, including this volute crater fragment on the top with satyrs trampling grapes to make wine, another discus thrower, a flying eros, another discus thrower that's in Atlanta, in Emory, and this likathos that was just excavated in northern Greece in the Chalkidiki and is now in a Greek, will be in Inauguros in the new museum in Chalkidiki that opens next year, I believe. There are also works in the exhibition by students and followers of the Berlin painter. The Providence painter on the far left, Nolan, he follows him in many ways, in many particulars, but he always puts two figures, or tends to put two figures, where the Berlin painter would put one. The Hermonax, whose actual name we know because he signed 6 vases, Hermonax Egrafson, is fond of putting a single figure on the body of a likathos, but then a separate figure on the shoulder. This is a satyr eating grapes. And then the Achilles painter, who was his last follower, and who takes, this is an early work by him that's so close to him, it was once attributed to the late Berlin painter, and said it's an early work by the Achilles painter. We don't know his name either. He's named after a vase in the Vatican that shows Achilles. He took the workshop into the early classical period, when you have a simplification of the drapery and an evolution in style where you don't get the fans of beautifully archaic, closely drawn archaic style drapery folds, but the incipient classical style. The workshop continues all the way down, we can trace it down into almost to the end of the 5th century. And in our exhibition in Princeton and then also in Toledo, there are a few cups shown by other painters to flesh out the picture of vase painting in this period and to remind us that some of the best painting of the period is in fact on cups. These are 3 works in our collection that didn't go to Toledo because they're using vases of their own collection to do the same chore, with Menelaus, the king of Sparta, finally after 10 years at the sack of Troy, he sees his wife Helen. And he starts to draw his sword to kill her. But Aphrodite unveils her, and he sees her face, and he decides to kill her later. And he never gets around to it. A young man, again looking at his laptop here, that says, Ho pais kalos, the boy is fair. There's a horse race on the outside, so he might be figuring the odds. It could be a bookie. And then a cup by the Brigos painter, who's named after the potter Brigos, with the young Hermes, who has stolen the cattle of Apollo and now is lying in a basket, hiding in a cave. This is on the day of his birth, he did all of this. And this is his own mother and an incredulous cow looking at him, wondering, who is this kid? And then a vase familiar to you because it's outside in a case in the lobby that has always been attributed to Doris, who is a well-known vase painter and highly respected, and painted that beautiful white ground leucothos that's in your ancient Greek galleries, the Collis galleries. But now new research in the catalog allows us to say that the body of the vessel is painted by a painter we call the painter of Galikoff 37, not a very elegant name, but who was an early contemporary of the Berlin painter. And the shoulder, with a satyr between two maenads, is by the Berlin painter. And we know this by comparing it with other works of similar scale. This is the only work we know where he collaborated with another artist, but this is not an unknown, unheard of phenomenon. And I always end with the dog in London because I kind of like the dog. He looks sort of disgruntled, like, where are we going now, following his master. The Berlin painter is, who was he? You know, if a signature of his turned up, it would just be a name. And what I hope is that this exhibition will demonstrate to a wider audience that John Beazley was correct in identifying his distinctive system of renderings with a particular living individual and with a durable, identifiable body of work. To bring a person of the distant past to life, especially one so gifted, is a great accomplishment, and akin to reconstructing a broken vase from widely dispersed fragments. And it's one that's been repeatedly verified by a century of research. If the Berlin painter's art speaks to us today, it cannot be fully in the way that it did to the people of Athens in the early 5th century, nor would his Etruscan customers have seen him as the Athenians did. In every period and place, however, some things have always been appreciated: simplicity, balance, self-control. We value these things because we hope that they are our qualities too. The Berlin painter was a worker, a man of his hands, probably making a living wage, no more. We can imagine him sitting with a pot in his lap in a shady corner of his workshop with a dirty smock hitched up above his muddy knees. But although he would have been considered a humble craftsman in the context of Athenian society, the recognition and painstaking identification of his paintings now allows him to take a well-deserved place among the finest artists of ancient Greece. Thank you.
Now, for those of you who would like a signed copy of the catalog, by the way, the catalog, the first production run of the catalog sold out, so this is the second production run. You can have a signed copy, purchase a signed copy in the North Lobby. Also, I should announce that for the members of the Hellenic Preservation Society, there will be a reception in the Provenance restaurant. And let me announce next year's Collis Lecture. We are very proud to announce that Dr. Anthony Eastman, the Dean and Deputy Director of the Courtauld Institute of Art and Leventis Professor of Art History, will be lecturing next year on September 30th on the Cleveland St. Luke, the Byzantine artist as creator, bureaucrat, or copyist. I hope to see all of you then here at the museum. Thank you so very much.